By the time Alexander reached India, he had already broken the known world. He had smashed the Persian Empire, the greatest superpower of its age, in less than 5 years. Cities that had resisted for generations fell in days. Kings bowed, satraps fled, treasuries emptied into Macedonian hands. From the rocky coast of Asia Minor to the burning heart of Mesopotamia, from Egypt's deserts to the mountains of Bactria, Alexander marched forward with the unstoppable confidence of a man who believed the gods had chosen him. And for a while it seemed they had. He crossed the Hellespont as a young king with fewer than 40,000 men. He faced armies twice his size and annihilated them. At Issus, he broke Darius III himself. At Gaugamela, he ended the Persian Empire in a single, decisive night. Babylon opened its gates. Susa surrendered its gold. Persepolis burned, whether by strategy or impulse, no one could say. Alexander did not just conquer land, he erased systems. Persian administration collapsed. Royal roads became Macedonian highways. Coinage changed. Language shifted. Greek cities appeared where none had existed before. To his followers, this was not invasion. It was destiny unfolding. But destiny has limits. By 327 BC, Alexander stood in the far east of his empire, staring at lands the Greeks barely understood. Beyond the Hindu Kush lay a region known not as a country, but as an idea, India, a place of endless rivers, dense forests, vast populations, and kings whose power did not come from fragile courts, but from land, manpower, and time. To Alexander, India was the final horizon. Greek geography described it as the edge of the world, where the great ocean encircled the earth. Conquering India would not just make Alexander king of Asia, it would make him ruler of everything worth ruling. There would be nothing left beyond him, no rival, no unknown. So he marched. But the road into India was not a road at all. The first warning came in the mountains. The Hindu Kush did not fall like Persia's cities. There were no open plains for phalanxes to dominate, no clear battle lines, no single enemy to defeat. Tribal resistance was constant, decentralized, and merciless. Ambushes replaced set-piece battles. Supply lines stretched thin. Men died not in glory but in ravines, snowstorms, and sudden night attacks. Alexander adapted, as he always did. He learned to fight differently. He split forces. He hunted resistance leaders personally. He climbed cliffs with hand-picked troops. He won, but each victory cost more than the last. By the time he descended into the Indus Valley, his army was no longer the same army that had crossed into Asia years earlier. Veterans were exhausted. Replacements were scarce. Macedonian soldiers had been campaigning continuously for almost a decade. Many had families they had not seen since youth. Their armor was worn. Their morale, while still disciplined, was strained by distance, climate, and the creeping realization that the end kept moving farther away. India did not feel conquered, it felt endless. The Indus River marked Alexander's formal entry into the Indian subcontinent. Here, for the first time, he encountered kingdoms that did not collapse at the loss of one city or one ruler. Power was distributed. Armies were replenishable. Geography favored defense. Forests concealed movement. Rivers dictated strategy. Yet Alexander pressed forward. Some rulers submitted quickly, offering gifts, hostages, and elephants, creatures the Macedonians had never faced in battle before. Others resisted. One of them would become Alexander's most famous Indian opponent, King Porus, ruler of a powerful state east of the Hyphasis River. Porus did not flee. He did not negotiate. He prepared. When Alexander reached the Hyphasis in 326 BC, he faced a river swollen by monsoon rains. Crossing it under enemy observation was nearly impossible. Porus positioned his army on the far bank, confident. His forces included thousands of infantry, cavalry, chariots, and war elephants. Massive, armored, terrifying animals trained to break formations and crush men beneath their weight. Alexander had never faced elephants in battle. He waited. He feinted. He misled. And then, in one of his greatest tactical feats, he crossed the river upstream under cover of night and storm, catching Porus off guard. The Battle of the Hydaspes was brutal. Alexander won, but it was not a victory like Issus or Gaugamela. Macedonian soldiers struggled against elephants that trampled phalanxes and sent horses into panic. Casualties were heavy. The terrain worked against rigid formations. Victory came through flexibility, discipline, and sheer endurance, not overwhelming superiority. When Porus was captured and brought before Alexander, he was asked how he wished to be treated. Like a king, and Porus replied. Alexander respected him and reinstated him as ruler. But the message was clear. India was not Persia. Every battle would be costly. Every advance would be resisted. Every mile gained would demand blood. Still, Alexander marched east. Beyond the Hyphasis lay even greater powers, kingdoms with armies larger than anything Alexander had yet faced. Some Indian states could reportedly field hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Whether those numbers were exaggerated mattered less than the reality. Resistance was not diminishing, it was increasing. And then there was the environment. The monsoon rains turned roads into rivers. Heat and humidity exhausted men accustomed to Mediterranean climates. Disease spread quickly. Food became harder to secure. Foraging parties were attacked. Horses weakened. Armor rusted. Even victory felt punishing. By the time Alexander reached the Hyphasis River, modern Bees, his army stopped. Not temporarily, completely. They refused to go further. This was not a mutiny of fear. It was something more dangerous. Exhaustion mixed with clarity. Macedonian officers told Alexander what no one had dared say before. The men had reached their limit. They had fought for years without rest. They had crossed continents. They had fulfilled every promise Alexander had made. And now he was asking them to march into lands where the enemy was stronger, the climate worse, and the end invisible. Alexander argued. He pleaded. He invoked glory, legacy, and the favor of the gods. It did not work. For the first time in his career, Alexander was forced to turn back, not by an enemy army, but by the limits of human endurance. India had not been conquered, and the reasons ran deeper than a single refusal. They lay in scale, geography, logistics, resistance, and the quiet truth that even the greatest conqueror in history could not fight forever without breaking his army or himself. And as Alexander ordered the retreat, the dream of reaching the end of the world dissolved into the rain-soaked soil of the Indian plains. The decision to turn back at the Hyphasis River did not come from weakness. It came from reality. By the time Alexander reached the eastern edge of the Punjab, the war he was fighting no longer resembled the wars that had made him famous. In Persia, victory had meant destroying a centralized empire. Capture the king, seize the capitals, and the system collapsed. Power flowed downward. Remove the top, and everything below followed. India was different. There was no single empire to decapitate, no great king whose defeat would end resistance. Instead, the land was divided into numerous kingdoms, republics, tribal confederations, and regional powers, each capable of resisting independently. Even if Alexander defeated one ruler, others remained untouched beyond the rivers and forests. Conquest here would not be a campaign. It would be occupation. And Alexander's army was not built for that. Macedonian warfare relied on speed, decisive battles, and momentum. The phalanx dominated open ground. Cavalry strikes shattered enemy centers. Victory was fast and final. India denied him those conditions. Dense forests limited visibility. Rivers dictated movement. Seasonal floods erased supply routes. Battles could not always be forced, and when they were, terrain often neutralized Macedonian advantages. But the greatest problem was logistics. Alexander's army survived by moving forward. Supply lines stretched back thousands of kilometers, crossing mountains, deserts, and hostile territories. Every mile east made resupplies slower and less reliable. In Persia, captured cities fed the army. In India, food production existed, but distributing it to a foreign army in unfamiliar terrain proved far more difficult. Local populations did not always submit. Some retreated, taking supplies with them. Others attacked foraging parties. Small losses accumulated daily. Men disappeared in ambushes. Horses died from heat and disease. Equipment broke down faster than it could be replaced. This was a war of erosion, and erosion favors the defender. Then there were the elephants. At the Hyphasis, Alexander had encountered war elephants for the first time in large numbers. They had not defeated him, but they had changed the battlefield. Macedonian soldiers learned that traditional formations were vulnerable to mass, panic, and unpredictability. Horses refused to charge. Phalanxes lost cohesion. Even disciplined troops faltered when faced with animals that did not fear spears. Elephants were not invincible, but countering them required preparation, numbers, and adaptation. Indian armies had generations of experience using them. Alexander had weeks. Worse still, intelligence suggested that deeper in India, elephants were more numerous, better trained, and integrated into massive standing armies. Facing a few dozen was one thing. Facing hundreds or thousands was another entirely. Alexander's officers understood this. They also understood something else. Even if Alexander won every battle, holding India would drain the empire dry. Garrisons would be needed across enormous distances. Revolts would be constant. Reinforcements from Macedonia would take years to arrive if they arrived at all, and the army was already tired. This exhaustion was not just physical, it was psychological. Most of Alexander's veterans had grown up expecting a single campaign against Persia, followed by a return home wealthy and honored. Instead, the war had become endless. Each victory opened the door to another unknown. India felt like the final betrayal of expectations. A land beyond imagination, where conquest promised only more fighting. For the first time, Alexander's charisma met resistance it could not override. At the Hyphasis, the soldiers spoke through their generals. They did not shout. They did not riot. They simply refused to march. Alexander isolated himself in his tent for days, hoping the men would reconsider. They did not. When he finally emerged, he announced that the gods had sent unfavorable omens and that the army would turn south instead of east. It was a political fiction, one that allowed everyone to save face. Alexander preserved his image as a man guided by divine signs. The soldiers avoided open defiance, but the truth was clear. India had stopped him. The retreat itself became a nightmare. Marching south along the rivers exposed the army to constant skirmishing. Local resistance did not fade just because Alexander turned back. Some tribes fought harder, sensing vulnerability. Others attacked supply lines. Progress was slow and punishing. Then Alexander made one of his most controversial decisions. He chose to lead part of the army through the Gedrosian Desert, a barren wasteland where heat, thirst, and starvation killed more men than any enemy had. Why he did this remains debated. Some believe it was punishment for the army's refusal to march east. Others argue it was an attempt to mirror the mythical journeys of heroes and gods. Whatever the reason, the cost was catastrophic. Thousands died, animals collapsed, supplies vanished, survivors emerged broken, hardened, and permanently changed. The Indian campaign had not ended in triumph, it had ended in survival. Alexander returned west not as an unstoppable conqueror, but as a ruler confronting the limits of power. He had proven that India could be invaded, but he had also proven that it could not be conquered quickly, decisively, or cheaply. And time was something Alexander no longer had. His empire stretched from Greece to the Indus. Holding it together required administration, loyalty, and presence. Yet rebellions simmered. Satraps grew ambitious. Old enemies watched closely. The farther Alexander moved from the center, the more fragile his control became. India was not just a military challenge. It was a strategic impossibility. To conquer it fully would have required a different kind of war. One Alexander was not equipped to fight. A slow war of consolidation, decades of campaigning, generations of settlement, and acceptance that glory would be replaced by governance. That was never Alexander's vision. He was a conqueror, not a colonizer. And so India remained beyond his grasp, not because he lacked courage or genius, but because conquest itself has limits. Geography resists ambition, logistics punish overreach, and even legends must eventually stop marching. The story of Alexander in India is not one of defeat, but it is not one of victory either. It is the moment where the world pushed back,